Imagine the person you trust most in the world is standing 5 feet away from you. In the dim, flickering light of a suburban night, you see their familiar hair, their usual posture, and that unmistakable, playful glint in their eyes. They begin to make faces at you, silly, exaggerated expressions designed to make you laugh, and you do. You giggle into your pillow, sharing a secret late-night moment with the man who has protected you since the day you were born. But then the smile doesn't stop. It keeps widening. The skin begins to stretch until it tears at the corners. The eyes don't just squint, they migrate. And you realize with a cold, paralyzing dread that while your father is standing in that doorway, he is also screaming your name from the hallway behind you. This is not a campfire tale. This is the reality of the Bunk Bed Case, a documented account of domestic mimicry that defies everything we understand about the human brain and the safety of our own homes. The year was 1991. The setting was a split-level ranch house on Long Island, New York, a place where the floorboards had a predictable creak and the neighborhoods felt like fortresses of suburban security. Inside one of those bedrooms, a 5-year-old boy lay on the bottom of a set of bunk beds, while his 7-year-old sister was tucked in just a few feet above him. The room was mostly dark, save for the sickly yellow glow of a porch light filtering through the window, casting long, wavering shadows across the carpet. It started with a movement in the doorway. A figure appeared, peeking through the crack of the door. To the children, it was instantly recognizable. It was their father. He was a funny dad, someone who loved to tease and play. In the logic of a child, seeing him there at 1 a.m. wasn't scary. It was an invitation. The figure began to pull faces at them, peeking in and out. The siblings began to laugh, their giggles muffled by their blankets. But as they watched, the playfulness began to rot. The laughter died in their throats as the features of the man they loved started to distort. The face began to shift into something that witnesses later described as a mix of the Joker and the witch from The Wizard of Oz. The eyes became prominent, bulging out of the sockets, and the mouth opened to reveal too many teeth, set in a grin that was no longer human. The playful peeking became a rhythmic, mechanical twitch. The figure wasn't just making evil faces, it was melting into a caricature of pure malice. The children began to scream, and that's when the nightmare truly fractured. As they stared in horror at the monster in the doorway, their actual father, the real man with his jet black hair and husky frame, came running into the room from a completely different door. He flicked on the light, and the thing in the first doorway simply vanished. It didn't run, it didn't hide. It ceased to exist the moment the real signal entered the room. To understand how two children could see the same horrific distortion at the same time, we have to look at the terrifying intersection of neurology and the mimic phenomenon. In clinical circles, this is known as Prosopometamorphopsia, or PMO, often called demon face syndrome. PMO is an extremely rare condition where the brain's facial recognition software glitches. Instead of seeing a normal face, the observer sees features that are drooping, melting, or floating away. But PMO is usually the result of a stroke, a tumor, or a brain lesion. It doesn't typically strike two healthy children simultaneously. This leads us to a secondary, more unsettling psychological state, folie à deux, or shared psychosis. In the bunk bed case, the 7-year-old sister likely acted as the primary, or inductor. In the high-stress, low-light environment of that bedroom, her brain may have experienced a perceptual glitch. Because children are highly suggestible and siblings share an intense emotional bond, her fear was transmitted to her 5-year-old brother instantly. Science tells us that the human brain is a pattern-seeking machine. In a dark room, when visual input is low, a state called deferentation, the brain starts to fill in the gaps. It takes the minimal information it has, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and projects what it expects to see. In this case, the children expected their father. But when the brain over-amplifies this projection, it can lead to cortical hyperexcitability, where the perceived face begins to warp into a nightmare. We can actually model this relationship relationship between sensory input I and perceived distortion D using a rough logarithmic scale. D equals K times A over the natural logarithm of I plus 1, where K is a constant of neural sensitivity and A represents physiological arousal or fear. As the light dollar I in the room approached 0 and the children's arousal A spiked from laughter to terror, the perceived distortion D approached infinity. But the science fails to explain why this exact same mimic pattern repeats across the globe, involving people who have never met. Consider the case from July 2017, known as the "That's Not My Daughter" incident. A mother saw a figure that matched her daughter's petite frame, standing in her kitchen doorway in an odd position, feet wide apart, arms slightly raised. The mother called out to her, only for her real daughter to walk up from outside the house moments later. When the mother looked back, the entity had moved 10 feet closer, staring directly at her with that same inhuman posture. Or look at the 2020 account of the Amputee Mimic. A son saw his father standing in a doorway, wearing his usual clothes and sporting his usual face. But the father had been an amputee since 2017, normally wearing a prosthetic metal pole for a leg. The figure in the doorway had 2 biological legs. The moment the son noticed this impossible feature, the entity backed away and slammed the door. This is the hallmark of the mimic, the uncanny detail. It is the realization that something is almost human, but fundamentally off. This triggers what evolutionary psychologists call the Uncanny Valley, a deep primal revulsion that likely evolved to help our ancestors detect disease or competing species. When a face is barely human, our brains scream at us to run. In folklore, these entities are called changelings or doppelgangers. They are supernatural substitutes that mimic our loved ones with malicious intent. They are often described as having long teeth, distorted faces, and a tendency to act strangely when they believe they are not being watched. Some paranormal researchers believe these aren't just ghosts, but parasitic entities. They pretend to be deceased relatives or familiar family members to lure us into letting our guard down. They feed on the intense harvest of fear that occurs when that trust is betrayed. The Bunk Bed Case is particularly chilling because the entity chose to initiate the encounter through funny faces. It weaponized the children's joy. It waited until their laughter had opened their hearts, and then it began to distort the very face that represented their ultimate safety. Psychologically, a smile is a social cue for positivity, but when it is incongruent with the environment, like a predatory Cheshire smile in a pitch-black room, it becomes the most terrifying image the human mind can process. It signals a predator that understands the shape of human emotion, but not the spirit of it. So, why do these things vanish when the lights come on? In neurology, it is the overwriting of a glitch with real data. When the father burst into that Long Island bedroom and flicked the switch, the brain was flooded with a clean signal, and the demon face hallucination was instantly erased. But in the world of the unexplained, it's a different story. These entities are tricksters that exist in the 4th dimension, or the thresholds of our reality. Doorways, hallways, and the moments between waking and sleep. They flee from the light because they can only exist where our perception is vulnerable. The siblings from the bunk beds are adults now. They still talk about that night in 1991. They still remember the way the yellow porch light caught those evil features and the grotesque smile that looked like it had been carved from ear to ear. The most haunting part of their story isn't that they saw a monster, it's that they saw their father becoming a monster. As you go to bed tonight, think about the layout of your home. Think about the doorways that lead into your room and the cracks in the doors that you leave open to let in a sliver of light. We trust our eyes to tell us the truth, and we trust our families to be who they say they are. But remember the bunk bed case. Remember that the brain is a fragile thing, and sometimes the dark is more than just an absence of light. Sometimes the dark is a canvas. If you see a familiar face peeking at you from the hallway tonight, making a silly face to get a rise out of you, don't laugh. Because if you look closely, if you really look at the eyes and the way the skin is stretching, you might realize that the person you love is actually sound asleep in the room next to you. you. And if that's the case, then who is the man in the doorway? Stay vigilant. The mimics are still out there, hiding in the pitch black of our memories and the shadows of our suburban ranch houses. They are waiting for you to find them funny. They are waiting for the laughter to stop, and they are waiting for the moment the lights go out. Good night, and whatever you do, watch the door.